asked, you'll be asked to authorize that you're happy for me to record. So when I record, it's just me that's seen. Nobody else is seen. So could you just confirm that you're happy for that to happen? And then I'll make a start. Now, the purpose of tonight's session is for me to go through these questions about the perimenopause or the menopause. And I've tried to leave a gap, or I have left a gap at the end for you, if you're comfortable to pop your cameras on, unmute yourself and ask any questions that you've got of me. At any time, if you do need to leave, this is being recorded, so you will be able to leave if you want to, and you will get a copy of the recording sent out to you once that we're done. I've got a little box here with everybody's names. I've just made that smaller because otherwise I think there's a possibility you can't see the full screen. But do keep talking to me in the chat button. This is a bit like driving a plane and not being able to see where I'm going. I'm just muting whoever's just come in. And in fact, I'm just going to turn the auto mute on so that if people do come in, we don't have to do anything about it. So good evening, Annabelle. I've seen that you've just come in too. So off we go. My slides have gone backwards. Who am I? I'm Sam Palmer, and this is a Menopause Myths online workshop or webinar, which I've designed to answer some of your questions, reassure you, hopefully, about some of the things. It's not Wednesday, the 26th of May. I did change the slide and clearly it didn't save. So who is Sam Palmer? Well, I am a wife, a mum, a stepmom. I'm 57, I'm 58 tomorrow, actually. I'm a nurse by training. I'm also a qualified teacher. I worked in further education for a good few years, and I have been a coach for 22 years. I've run a female fitness club here in Sevenoaks in Kent, which is where I live. Yes, for 23 years in September. And I've been a menopause health and fitness expert, helping women specifically in the menopause for about 8 or 9 years before it got trendy. Welcome to you, Sam. Sarah, I've seen that you've just come in. So what I'm hoping that I can do is put together all my skills, all my knowledge, and give you a reassuring look at this life phase and hopefully answer some of your questions. The aim of tonight is threefold, really, to explain to you very briefly, and I'm not a saleswoman and I'm not here to tell you any more about it, but I do have an online group coaching program. I do one-to-one coaching. I do permanent online fitness classes for women, particularly focusing on the 3 areas of your fitness. Good evening, Melina. Particularly focusing on the 3 areas of your fitness, which are so important. And you'll come in a minute to understand why that's so important. And that's your strength, your cardio fitness, and your restorative fitness. And finally, I do corporate menopause education. So if you're in a workplace and you're looking, as thank goodness so many workplaces are, you're looking for somebody to come and talk in an entertaining way to your staff about the menopause, about the requirements for keeping people's health and safety, etc., menopause wise up to date, or even talking to your employees. That's very much something I do too. So if you've got any questions about those, pop me an email at the end of the session. So you are in the right place if you're interested in learning more about the menopause. You have perhaps so many unanswered questions. You know things that are a bit different in your body, and maybe you're a bit confused about what's safe, what's perhaps scientifically proven or not, and what options you have. And I know that after the Davina program, a lot of people ended up feeling a little bit more confused and they had more questions. So I do want to reassure you that this isn't going to be death by PowerPoint. I'm not reading through every single one of these slides, but they're there as much for me to highlight some of the things I want to cover as much as anything else. Do feel free if you need to leave, that's absolutely fine. As I say, I am recording this. I plan to finish at about 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock. You can have a cup or a glass of wine if you want to, although about 15 or 20 minutes in, you might think, well, maybe I shouldn't have the wine. And as I say, I am recording it. So the idea of doing this webinar came about because lots of people got in touch with me either via my Facebook group page or on Instagram and said, okay, I really enjoyed this program, but I do feel like I've got just as many questions at the end of it. And I thought, okay, let's get on to that. So if you haven't seen it, Michelle, you are in Ibiza. I don't know, therefore, whether you will have seen it. But certainly throughout the UK and most of Europe, this programme was available. I know that it's going to be made available in the US and in Australia and New Zealand, if it hasn't already been done so. So this was on the 12th of May, Davina McCall, Sex Myths and the Menopause. And she took the topic of the menopause and answered some people's questions. It was quite pro HRT, and we will come on to HRT, hormone replacement therapy. And it didn't go into the exercise or the nutrition side of looking after your menopause symptoms in great detail. Now, in my opinion, Davina McCall, you may or may not know, has an online fitness channel. And I suspect that people would have said, well, you're just banging on about what you do. You're just trying to make a quick buck if she had talked about fitness. And you can talk about fitness and nutrition for hours. In fact, my online program really focuses on that element of keeping ourselves healthy, and what she could cover in an hour clearly wasn't all that much. So I suspect that's why. So what they didn't tell you, how do you know if I'm perimenopause or menopause, and what's the difference? How can I treat my menopause symptoms without using HRT? And what diet is best for menopause to prevent weight gain? Now, what I do suggest that you do while I'm going through these questions is that you jot down any questions that occur to you while I'm talking, because as I've said, and I know a couple of you came in a wee bit late, I will allow some time at the end for you to ask me your questions, or I'll answer the questions that are in the chat. Now, obviously, any advice I give is sort of generic rather than specifically for people, because I can't do that in this situation, but I'll do my best really to answer your questions, however worried you are about asking them. And also, it's important to say there's no such thing as a silly question. I'm sure you know that. How do I know if I'm in perimenopause or menopause, and what is the difference? A lot of people didn't even know about this term perimenopause. They had only heard of the word menopause. And in fact, it's the perimenopause that is the thing that it's really important for people to know about, because it lasts such a long time. What is it? It's the time where the naturally occurring hormone production starts to change. And you know what? That starts at 35. So sometimes when you look back at when you were in your mid-30s and you knew that certain things were happening, it makes you realize, oh my gosh, actually, that was quite a long time ago. That's when the perimenopause first starts, peri meaning around the menopause. Now, this is the kicker. It lasts 6 to 10 years. Some people have even said it lasts up to 15 years. So it makes sense, doesn't it, to have a clear idea of what this life stage is all about and how you can feel really good about it. So therefore, what's the menopause? Well, this is the permanent end of menstruation, which is the official word for periods. And your fertility, therefore, which actually comes 12 months after your last period. So, for instance, if tomorrow at lunchtime you haven't had a period for 12 months, then you would be said to be in the menopause. And in that 12-month period, you're still perimenopausal. It is worth noting you can still get pregnant for a year, 12 months after your last period. So it is worth just being aware of that. Okay, so it's not a disease, it's very definitely a life phase. Today's woman will identify or will have about a third of her life in the menopause. We are living for so much longer now. Did you know you can buy a birthday card for somebody who's 101, 109, and I think 110? So there's a lot of time where you're going to be in this menopause period. So it makes sense, doesn't it, to have that being the best possible time that you can. Now, what do you need to know? I think this is really important. Let's go with people who are over 45 for the moment. You know something's going on, you can feel that you've had different symptoms, and you might take yourself to the doctor. And that doctor, if you're over 45, generally, particularly if it's an NHS doctor, will not take a blood test from you to decide whether you're in the menopause. They will ask you what symptoms you've got. So you might have hot flushes, you might have night sweats, you might have mood swings, you might have intense anxiety. If you're ticking yes to all of these boxes, that might be you. You might have put on weight. You might be coping with incredibly dry skin, dry hair, dry nails. You might be flooding with your periods, or you might not be having very many periods and then suddenly having one. You could have tinnitus. You could have itching in your ears. You could have an itch somewhere over your body. There are 32 things that you could tell your doctor about, and that would give him or her an indication, if you were over 45, that you were definitely perimenopausal, and if you haven't had a period, menopausal. And that stage of your life can be largely controlled, if you want it to, by your lifestyle and your diet. However, if you wish to take HRT, and I will come on to that, hormone replacement therapy, that's very definitely something which would help potentially you deal with those menopause symptoms, depending on how bad they are. Now, with HRT, you can take it forever if you want to. So I'm saying here, these are the need to knows. This is me busting some myths. You can take it forever if you want to. You don't only have to take it for 5 years is something I hear, and 10 years is something I hear. Okay, and if you haven't had a period, and that was more than 5 years ago, you don't have to now not have HRT. If you want to go back to your doctor and you haven't had a period and it was more than 5 years, you can start HRT later on in this life stage. So I'm just, again, busting some myths. What I do want to explain very clearly here is that HRT does not halt menopause, because this is a big misnomer. So let's say Sally, okay, takes HRT when she's 52, and Sally lives for the next 5 or 7 years a fairly symptom-free life. And then she gets to 60 and she decides to come off HRT. And wow, her symptoms come back. So there she is, 60, with full-on menopause symptoms again. The night sweats, the hot flushes, the anxiety, they all come back. That is not because Sally has stopped HRT and her menopause symptoms have halted. It's because Sally was always going to have menopause symptoms until that age. And equally, Mary might have exactly the same situation. She goes on HRT, and she also comes off it when she's 60 because she decides she wants to, and she doesn't have any symptoms. And that's because Mary was never going to have menopause symptoms until she was 60. My mother is 82. She still has hot flushes during the day and night sweats at night. That was always going to happen for her. I don't know what the situation will be for me, but every woman is very different. So HRT is not halting your menopause. What it's doing is alleviating some of the symptoms from it. Now, what you also need to know is that if you're under 45 and you go to your doctor, and your doctor is forward thinking enough to listen to you, they will normally take bloods. And that is because if your estrogen levels are going down so much that you're getting all of these menopause symptoms that I've just mentioned, one of the byproducts of that means that your bones and your heart are not being protected in the same way. And that doctor, if he is forward thinking, would be aware that you're not being protected by your own estrogen, and would suggest to you that it would be wise for you to consider taking HRT for that reason. Now, if you are somebody who is doing an awful lot of fitness, your nutrition is absolutely optimum, you're taking enough rest, and you're doing all the other lifestyle things, then you can come to a decision with your doctor or your healthcare provider that you at the moment don't want to do that. And that's something that you can come on to. I do also just want to mention that HRT is made now from yams, the sweet potato. So it's a plant-based HRT. That's the one that most forward-thinking doctors will prescribe. There are some still old codgers out there, I know. And that HRT is given in 2 forms. Now, I talk about this quite a lot in my 7-day video series on, I think it's day 7, where I give a fairly clear indication of HRT, what it is, how you can use it. And at the end of this webinar, if you are interested, I can give you the link for you to sign up for this 7-day video series, because I go through various different topics, and it's quite nice for you to have some of these topics in a little bit more detail. As I say, it's completely free, and I go into HRT in a bit more detail on the last one of those. Okay, so how can I treat my menopause symptoms without using HRT? That's a big question that comes up quite frequently. A little bit of a whistle-stop tour here. Estrogen in the UK is spelt with an O. In the US and Australia, it's spelt E with estrogen like that. And you sometimes see this meme around that indicates that estrogen goes down and down and down and down until you're 80. In fact, that's not true. It goes up and down and up and down and up and down. Your hormones, when they fluctuate, when that estrogen goes down, has certain effects on you. So I wonder if any of you have noticed any of these, that any weight gain you've put on has gone straight to your tummy. Perhaps when you were younger, you would put on weight on your legs or your boobs, but now you notice that it goes straight to your tummy. You may also notice that you have cravings for certain foods. You're generally more hungry. You may also notice that you're waking up in the night hot and certainly not bothered. You're having these night sweats, and that's leading to you sleeping really quite badly. You may also notice that you have whoops moments. If you're on a trampoline with a child, if you've got a child with a trampoline, if you're out running, if you're going to the theatre with your husband and you're in London and he suddenly drags you across the road very, very quickly before the traffic lights change, and you get dragged and you suddenly have to run, and you think, oops, I'm not completely in control of my bladder. And therefore that may be so bad that you've actually stopped going to exercise classes because you're so embarrassed about it. All of those symptoms are signs of your estrogen levels dropping. I'd be interested to know if any of you have noticed any of those. Okay, and the other main hormone that drops that we hear about is progesterone, these 2 main hormones. Now, that often leads to a loss of your own, it's called your diuretic, your body's ability to get rid of excess fluid. So do you notice that perhaps you've got a washboard stomach in the morning, but by the time you get to the end of the day, your tummy looks like it's 3 or 4 months pregnant with fluid retention, you're feeling really bloated? And then on the sleep front, perhaps in this situation, you go to sleep really easily, but you wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, bang, wide awake, and you can't for the life of you get back to sleep until it's about 5:30, and then you've got to wake up at 6:30. So progesterone has an effect on your sleep in the middle of the night, rather than estrogen, the decline in estrogen, which wakes you up. You may also find that you're generally exhausted. What used to be quite easy for you to do, regularly active, now feels like, oh my gosh, I just can't be bothered. You're just generally less active. And let's be honest, COVID and lockdown and a lack of ability to do the things we used to do means that possibly we're even more less active. And the knock-on effect of this is that those muscles which you had in your body as a result of doing the activity you did are now not being used in the same way. And that means those muscles have actually shrunk, which means your body is a car with an engine that's still having the right amount of petrol put in it for a big car with 3 exhaust pipes and a huge engine. But actually, it's now a tiny engine with 1 exhaust pipe, and it needs hardly any petrol. So we're eating the same amount of food as we used to eat, but we haven't got as much muscle. You're getting the hint here, aren't you, that muscle is really important for weight maintenance as we head into our perimenopause and menopause. Okay, let's look at some of those symptoms of menopause again. So I mentioned the normal ones that you've heard about, the hot flushes, the night sweats, and the anxiety and terrible mood swings. But I also mentioned some of the more unusual ones. Itching under your skin. The lack of estrogen affects the nerve endings under your skin. So some people tell me that they feel like they've got ants crawling under their skin. In fact, I know somebody who actually went to a dermatologist convinced that they had a place on their back was going to be lanced and there were going to be eggs in that bit. They're constantly scratching. And because our skin's quite dry, you then start itching it, and that makes it even worse. In fact, dry skin, it's not up here on this slide, is something I did a Facebook Live about fairly recently. If you're on Instagram, you can watch it. And I was talking about people having dry, itchy legs at night and a dry face, and mentioning that basically anything that foams is going to dry your skin out. So it's a good time to look at the products you use. You may never really have had allergies, but you may start having allergies now. I became very allergic, funnily enough, to the sun about 4 years ago. I've got quite dark skin, but I was on holiday and the sun was out and I had spots all over my face. And my normal sunscreen, factor 15, that was just in my moisturizer, stopped being enough. And I have to go to factor 30 now. Otherwise I get spots all over my face. And I forget during the winter. And about 2 weeks ago, spots all came back. And I suddenly thought, oh my gosh, the weather has changed again. So just something simple like that came out of nowhere. Brain fog. There was somebody again that I was out with a while ago who said that she had written a shopping list out and she couldn't remember the name of the fruit, which when you cut in half, there are pink, juicy little berries in it that you can take out and use in Moroccan cooking. And that's what she put on the shopping list for her husband, because brain fog is one of the things that happens. Now, this can manifest itself in a workplace where you're working with somebody and you can't remember their surname. You're delivering a presentation and you can't remember what you were going to say. It can be acutely embarrassing. You can go upstairs into your bedroom to get something and forget why you're there. You can put your keys in the fridge, your glasses in the oven, all sorts of things. And in the home situation, that's fine. But when we're in the workplace, that can become acutely embarrassing. There's a really well-known neurologist called Lisa Mosconi, who's just the last week produced some new information, new research, which has proven that our menopausal brain actually adapts during this time so that we are not constantly in this brain fog phase. We go into this phase and we do come out of it. And the best thing for maintaining a healthy brain through menopause, other than using your brain with, whether that's cognitively with puzzles and things that you do or in a work situation, but one of the best things is to have a Mediterranean diet, and the other one is movement. So that's something to think about, a Mediterranean diet. And again, when I'm coaching people in my program, getting them to engage in changing the way they eat and eat for their menopause is really important. Tinnitus is something that some people get, really irritating, has a massive effect on your sleep. And sore boobs, where did they come from? We didn't have them for years and then suddenly they come back. And for a woman, really embarrassing, your hair can appear to be starting to thin. Now, we lose about 100 hairs a day. I don't know if you knew that. So if you've got long hair and you brush your hair and you've got 100 hairs in your brush, that looks like quite a lot. And 100 hairs when your hair is very short doesn't look like very much. And if it's perhaps grown throughout lockdown, it may look like you're losing more, but your hair does thin. So again, paying attention to our diet is very definitely something which will help those symptoms. So here we are. This is the cast of Downton Abbey. And our hormones are a little bit like this cast. If one of the cast members isn't there, then your hormones will go awry. We need to keep a nice balance of our hormones so that we aren't experiencing as many menopause symptoms as other people do. So what I thought I'd do is just go through very quickly, without too much doom and gloom, what happens in various areas of our body and how it affects. So I mentioned this spare tire, which can end up on your tummy. Now, aesthetically, that may not look very nice, but it's not really aesthetics that we're worried about. What I'm actually concerned about you understanding is that if your waist is 32 inches or more, your risk of metabolic disease, that's diabetes and strokes, heart attacks, those sorts of things, your risk of metabolic disease increases. So if there's one thing that you do at the end of this, and that's perhaps get a tape measure out, don't do it while I'm talking because you'll miss things. Get a tape measure out and have a quick measure and think, is that something I need to be aware of? Anxiety, particularly in the mornings. If you wake up in the mornings with a churning stomach and you don't know why, you haven't got a meeting, you haven't got something to feel anxious about, then it's likely that that could be one of these symptoms. And there are lots and lots of tips, again, that I've shared in the Facebook group. And I know some of you have only joined fairly recently because I had a look to see who was coming tonight and who's in the Facebook group. So if you search through the Facebook group for anxiety, my lovely colleague Helen Walker has shared lots of tips about dealing with midlife anxiety, tips you can use at work to help you there and then. Forgetting things, I've mentioned that. Why do you keep forgetting things? Well, it's due to your hormones. And this is a biggie, given that my passion is midlife movement, having joints that ache. And again, we have estrogen receptors in our joints, particularly your knees, your shoulders, and your ankles. One of the joints that I hear people talk about most frequently is, in fact, their shoulders. And frozen shoulder is something that I've experienced on both of my shoulders. It has, for me, taken about 8 months on each shoulder. Luckily, I've been able to continue to teach through both of my frozen shoulders with a reduced range of movement. And a frozen shoulder normally has 3 phases. You get a phase where it comes on and you've got full range of movement and lots of pain. And then it might become that you've got a very, very small range of movement and perhaps less pain. And then slowly you come out of it. But motion is lotion for our achy joints in the menopause. And if you are doing daily movement, and that's movement and exercise, your joints are much less likely to be achy. So do bear that in mind. And I am going to come on to the type of movement that you might be thinking about doing. Okay, why has my libido left the building? Well, actually, you may be interested to know that your libido hasn't left the building. This is a little bit of an interesting tip. Apparently, a man's libido goes up and down. Our libido is fairly constant. What happens is that our tissues in our vagina and our vulva may become basically less juicy because of this decline in estrogen. And that means that our desire for sex, for intercourse, starts to decline. And women are very much triggered by emotional and touch elements when they're getting ready, when they're preparing for sex as we get older. So whereas a man's libido goes up and down, apparently ours is constant. But what we need are the emotional triggers for us to have sex. Now, my role as a menopause coach is to help people understand where they can get help for these crunchy noo-noos and where they can get help for incontinence and where they can get help for pelvic floor issues. But I also work really closely with a lady called Claire McCauley, if you want to write that down. She has a Facebook group called The Pleasure Possibility, and her skills being so open and honest about this often really rather embarrassing subject are incredible. She has what does she call her? Verity, the Velvet Vulva. And she uses Verity, the Velvet Vulva, this thing like a children's toy, to explain very clearly what happens when our estrogen levels decline and why basically everything feels as dry as a cactus and what you can do about it. So what I will just say at this point is you can take vaginal estrogen topically, that means on your skin in this vulval area, without that estrogen being taken into your system, as my mother calls it. It literally stays in the vulval area. So if you absolutely know that you can't take estrogen or HRT because of some estrogen dependent cancer that might have been in your family, then if you are struggling with these pelvic floor issues, whether that's urgency or dryness or real discomfort, then please do consider getting some help about this. The drug is called Vagifem. It has to be prescribed, but you could book a one-to-one appointment with me. It's free, and I'll give you the link after this to talk this through, and then I'll tell you what to go and speak to your GP about. Or if you've got a good relationship with your GP, head off and book an appointment with them, because it's not something anybody needs to struggle with. Likewise, this Vagifem can also help with leaking around exercise, as can HRT. But equally, I work very closely with women's health physiotherapists and other people who specialize in giving you the tools to change this problem. It's not, I'm going to say it's not good enough to put a sanitary towel in, and that sounds very judgmental. I don't mean it to be. It's not good enough to put up with having to wear a sanitary towel so you can exercise. What's really important is that you have access to the people who deal with this every single day and who can be incredibly matter of fact about helping you get the answers you need without you suffering. Because if you're going to live to 109 and be happy doing it, you need to be able to move. More importantly, you need to be able to get yourself to your toilet when you want to, rather than when somebody else decides they're going to take you. When will I ever feel like I used to again? You will, but this is a life phase. And the more we understand it, the more research tells us you are actually going to feel better quicker. Putting your head in the sand and not accepting it, or thinking, oh, this is all doom and gloom, which it really isn't, is actually not going to help you. The more we understand, the better we feel. So what I'd like to say to you is that what worked in your 20s and 30s stopped being quite so good in your 40s. And by the time you're 50, it may be doing you more harm than good. What do I mean about that? Okay, keto diets. There are still lots of people advocating on Instagram and on Facebook that the keto diet is the perfect diet for women in their midlife. Let me say this very clearly now. Yes, we do need to intermittent fast. That means that you eat your last evening meal somewhere, ideally between 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock, ideally towards 6 o'clock, so 7 o'clock-ish, and you intermittently fast until the next morning, and then you eat again. So that is intermittent fasting. If you are of a mind to be a brunch girl and go a little bit longer, maybe every day, that's absolutely fine. But eating 400 or 500 calories 2 or 3 days a week, and then eating what you like on the other days, is a constant stress to your system, to your hormones. We need, at our age, to have a constant supply of blood sugar. So for most people, that means eating a small regular meal 3 times a day, and bring it on, girls, having a morning and an afternoon snack. Now, what that snack is the really important bit. So it's not sugary, it's slow release carbohydrate or protein. So it might be 1 oat cake with some peanut butter. It might be a couple of sticks of carrot or cucumber with some hummus. It might be 5 or 6 almonds and 1 date. It may be occasionally, and probably for me tomorrow, a bit of cake, but you're going to enjoy that cake and savor it. You're not going to inhale it. That's also really important. And I do, in my 7-day video series, talk about that a lot. So again, it's worth watching. Now, what do I mean by steady state exercise? We used to go to exercise classes when we were younger, where you did an hour's worth of exercise, but you weren't really puffing very much at all. You were in what's called a steady state. And that exercise now isn't really doing anything other than using up time. Our exercise now needs to be very specific to our lifestyle needs. And I'm going to come on to that in a minute. But if you're invited to an aerobic class which ticks over for an hour and you don't really puff very much, consider that you might have a better use of your time. And oh my gosh, this is a boring one, isn't it? But alcohol. Yes, we used to be able to drink far more alcohol than we can now, and it didn't end up on our stomach. It didn't end up making us wake up in the night, having hot flushes, and it didn't have an effect on our moods. Sadly, now it does. Now, I will just give you a couple of hints. Wine tends to be worse than spirits, and the lower sugar wines are better than the higher sugar wines. Champagne may be the best of the wines. So if you do enjoy a tipple, and of course we do, try and limit the amount of times a week you're drinking. And again, in my online programs, it's something I try and help people find adaptations to break the wine o'clock time of day. When I was young and I was stressed, I could easily lose half a stone in a couple of weeks. I don't know about you. Now, the more stressed we are, the bigger we get. And that's because we're producing cortisol. And the effect of this cortisol means that our other hormones become unbalanced or imbalanced, and we end up laying down fat around our tummy. So this is something I talk a lot about in the Facebook group, on Instagram, and on every place I can get in front of you. To help you find ways to manage your stress. We could talk about that for 8 weeks, but we're not. I'm going to mention that to you now. And again, if you want to book a one-to-one with me to talk about ways that you might reduce your stress, please do. Beige food. Other than quinoa, which is beige, there aren't, and oats, which are beige, there aren't that many, hummus, that's beige, there aren't that many beige foods that I think you should employ as part of your week. Our food should be as colourful as possible, because the more coloured food we have in our diet, the more increased the biodiversity is of your gut. And the more vegetables and fruit you have in your diet, the better your hormones will be balanced. So using food is really important. And a simple way to do that is to think about avoiding beige food. And then finally, late nights and late mornings, we could cope with those. I suspect that most of you have noticed that your sleep has changed anyway, but trying to stick to a fairly early night and possibly an early morning is often going to be better for us. And again, in that 7-day video series, I go into sleep particularly in a bit more detail. So really, we would be looking at a 3-centered plan if you were going to embark on some changes. You would embark on some lifestyle changes, some nutrition changes, and possibly either via your healthcare professional or a nutritionist, some other supplement changes. So under the heading of lifestyle, meditation. I don't know if you meditate. Feel free to put yes or no in the chat box, and I am going to open this up in a sec. But meditation helps to switch off our cortisol levels. That meditation can be sitting cross-legged in the middle of a room on a yoga mat, but it can be moving meditation. I often find that my walks with my dog, Elma, who you may have seen, are my form of meditation, paying attention to your sleep, bringing the right kind of exercise. Epsom salt baths, did you know about that? Epsom salt baths are full of magnesium. And then when you increase your magnesium, it helps to offset that lack of progesterone, which I told you has an effect on your sleep. So magnesium salt baths are really important. And believe it or not, your friends, our friends would come under the heading of counselling, really. We all know that talking to somebody about how we're feeling really, really helps us. Looking onto your nutrition, foods rich in estrogens, I'm going to come on to that in a second, and reducing alcohol, reducing our salt. How much salt do you have? Well, most of us are quite good at not sprinkling loads of salt onto our food. But if you have processed foods, there's often lots of hidden salts in those. So if you can reduce that, that's a really good idea. And it becomes vital for both your brain and your gut and your bowels to increase the amount of fluids you drink to around 2 litres a day. I'm just very quickly going to go on to your healthcare professional. I've mentioned HRT. Actually, HRT, I should have changed this slide, is now across the board known as body identical HRT. Initially, it was called bioidentical HRT. The British Menopause Association has changed it across the board now in the UK to body identical hormones. And they are the hormones which are not tested, which are not produced from animals, sorry. They're made from yams, and they are the ones that the survey done all those years ago were not done on. So these are the safe ones. And if you watch Davina's program, this is what she was talking about. Vitamin D, I would suggest everybody goes on vitamin D. I would also suggest you might look at magnesium, and you can get those from a reputable health food shop. Now, there are various supplements that you might think about trying. Black cohosh is one of them. Chasteberry is one of them. But I will at this point say that the research I've done with the people that I've coached over the last 8 years is that supplements tend to work for a very short period of time. And actually you do as well to save your money on supplements other than vitamin D and magnesium, and spend your money on your nutrition and finding other ways of looking after yourself. Okay, so specifically about foods, I did want to mention this to you. So you might like to jot some of these down, and don't forget the recording will be sent to you so you can go through it again if you want to. Particular foods that I recommend you have is cruciferous vegetables. So basically all the farty ones, Brussels sprouts, cabbages, broccoli, cauliflower, all of those vegetables are particularly positive in a menopausal, perimenopausal diet. I would also suggest that you look up flax seeds, linseeds and flax seeds, the same thing from the same family, and that you start finding ways of having seeds in your diet. Now, if you buy flax seeds whole, it's worth me telling you that you get the most nutrition from them if you grind them. But as soon as you've ground them, they don't last very long, maybe a week or so. So you buy flax seeds whole, you might grind them in a NutriBullet or something similar like that, and then keep them in the fridge. I sprinkle seeds on my porridge, on any soup, on any omelette, any salad, anywhere basically, risottos, I sprinkle seeds everywhere. And they also add extra protein. Sesame seeds is another one. Soya in the form of miso, edamame beans, or soya products are also worth putting in your diet. They are plant-based estrogens. Now, you are never going to be able to eat the same amount of soya or estrogen through soya as you would get replaced with HRT. You're never going to be able to have the same level of effect, but you can have huge benefits from adding soya to your diet. And I would suggest that people do that anyway. Oily fish, particularly the mackerels, the sardines, the trout and the salmon are also important as well. But getting good oily fish or fish oils in the form of supplements is a good idea. Garlic, really useful, great for our gut. And then chickpeas, lentils, and pulses. So I hope I've talked slowly enough for you to jot some of these down, or perhaps you might like to get your phone out and take a quick screenshot of these. These foods are the ones that I think are important for you to have in your diet. Okay, so if you were going to make one change food-wise, it might be to have the perfect breakfast. For the perfect breakfast, I'd suggest you have some oats, whether that's porridge throughout the winter, or perhaps overnight oats you make with plant milk or dairy milk, whatever works for you. And then you add some berries to it. Berries give you some sugar, but they're not high in sugar, but they're also adding all sorts of antioxidants too. For me, at the moment, it's blueberries, and my strawberries are just coming out. I'd love to be able to grow blueberries. I don't, but you can get frozen blueberries. And whilst they don't have the same pop in your mouth, you do get the same vitamins from them. Every now and again, I see blueberries in the supermarket and they're all reduced. And so I buy about 5 packs and then I freeze them. But as I say, you can also buy them frozen. Seeds, as I've mentioned, I also put chia seeds and pumpkin seeds in my seed mix. Chia seeds is another form of protein. And then nuts, particularly walnuts and almonds. Walnuts are really good for brain health. So I might take 5 or 6 walnuts and crush them with my hands and sprinkle them on my breakfast. And then I top it with a dollop of natural, no sugar, live yogurt. And this live yogurt is fermented. And so fermented foods are another thing that are quite good for you to add into your diet. So if you're going to make one change, and it started with your breakfast, which you can also take in a pot to work if you ever go into work, because you can pre-make it, it would be perhaps something like that. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at what stresses you've got in your life right now. I suspect that most of us are dealing with one or all of these. I've got elderly parents who didn't think it was necessary for them to self-isolate, and they thought it was fine to go and buy a new car in Maidstone in December. You may be at a stressful point in your career. You may have financial worries, particularly if you're paying for kids to go through university or schooling, or because you haven't had any work for the last 18 months because of COVID. You may have stresses because your children are leaving school and they don't know where they're going. And because of the situation we've been in, that's adding extra stress. You may have friends or family who have been very ill. And even going through into the menopause causes a stress on your body. The fact that you're dealing perhaps with the household chores or organizing them, driving kids to and from, thinking about the stuff that you're going to eat in your house. We're juggling a million things. We are constantly dealing with stresses on our plate, and identifying what you can take off your plate again forms a big part of the way that I coach people, because sometimes people don't even realize they've just been putting themselves at the bottom of the pile for years, and nobody said, when is it your time, Michelle? When is it time for you to be looked after? And I would suggest that perhaps the answer is now. How can you reduce your stress in your life? Well, the 6 best doctors in the world, I love this: sunlight, rest, exercise, diet, self-confidence, and friends. They're fairly simple, aren't they? But yes, it's time to think about things that you can do, and learning how to say no, and how to say no quite politely without worrying about it. And then finally, I wanted to just go through your health and the exercise. In an ideal world, you would do 2 strength sessions a week, you would do 2 cardio sessions a week, and you would do 2 restorative exercises a week. Now, your strength may be a resistance class at, say, CrossFit or something like that. It's something where you're using your body weight or external weights. And the class that I do that ticks that box, and it's only 30 minutes because that's all we need, is an online class called Abs, Arms and Arse. Okay, you would then do 2 cardio sessions a week. Now, I know some of you have run with me in the past or do our power walking sessions. It may be you go to a Zumba class or a dance class. It may be you do something else. You go cycling or swimming, but anything that gets your heart rate up. Now, do just note that if you go swimming, that will get your heart rate up, but there's no resistance. So that doesn't tick the strength box. So this has to be in addition to this. And again, it can be just 30 minutes. And then the restorative exercise. Now, for me, that's yoga. If I can, it might be Pilates or yoga. It's walking, Elma, mindfully. It may be that you do Tai Chi. It may be that you do ballet or dance, and that's your restorative exercise. Or it could be that you are lucky enough to cycle along the coast on a flat bit and look at the view. Whatever it is that's restorative, that's what you should be doing. So the exercise is one thing, but then the amount of movement that you get every week or every day is also important. So there's this thing called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So that's basically when your body is your body's using up calories, but it's not doing any eating or exercising or just being, it's other things. So this is your sociable walking. It could be your fidgeting. My husband taps his foot on the floor all the time. It drives me up the wall, but actually fidgeting burns up calories. It may be you're a passionate gardener, or you're typing, or you're cleaning or scrubbing or anything like that. So that is something for you to take into account as well. Okay, so if you were going to make one change across the board with your movement, it would be that you would commit to moving every day, whether you're perhaps going to try and get 6,000 or 7,000 steps in. Maybe you're already at that and you think, right, I'm going to take it up to 10,000. If you're still working from home and you would have been commuting, perhaps you would get out and you would walk when you would have been commuting. You may already be doing that. That's great. In which case, maybe you'd commit to some kind of class, some kind of strength class. Now, there's loads of free stuff on YouTube. The only trouble with that is nobody's saying a bit lower, a bit higher, watch your knees. Nobody's motivating you. And I have to admit, the stuff that I've been doing online live over the last 15 months, I never thought it would work in the way that it has. But boy, have I seen amazing results with the ladies that have been doing it. And if you want to try a free class, you're more than welcome to. So what diet is best for menopause to prevent weight gain? I just want to highlight here, because I've talked about the foods that are going to go in, that trying to avoid a growing waistline is not about looking good on social media. It's about having a body that does what you want it to do and having the energy to live the life that you want to live and being disease-free. It's not about having a flat stomach. If you Google, how do I get a flat stomach? You get all sorts of these things with exercises you can do, which is all rubbish. You can do those, but they're not going to give you a flat tummy, or supplements you can take where you go from day 1 to day 14 and look like that. Again, it's not true. All of it is utter bullshit, as it were. It all comes down to your movement, your sleep, and your rest. And as I say, again, I go through these things in this menopause video series, which I will give you access to at the end of tonight's session. So in summary, if you're interested in joining some of my fitness classes, you're welcome to try one free. If you'd like me to come and talk to anybody that you are in charge of in your workplace or groups of people, I'm more than happy to do that. And if you're interested in my September program, I will share the details of that at some point. September seems a long time away, doesn't it? So now I'm going to stop sharing my slide program and I'm going to come back to a gallery view. And if you would like to unmute yourself and ask me any questions, or put your cameras on and ask me any questions, I would love to answer them. I know there was Alison Browning has said, yes, the mindfulness app Headspace. I think there's Headspace, isn't there, Alison? And the other one is Calm. The Calm app is also really good. So does anybody have any questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask if you do have any questions. Deathly silence.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, Michelle. You're in Ibiza, aren't you?
I am, and I'm not going to turn my camera on if that's all right, because I'm kind of just lounging on the couch a bit.
I'd love you to lounge. I'd love you to. After the effort you lot had getting into my webinar tonight, having to basically fill in a form about when you last went to the toilet, I'm so sorry. So well done for turning up, Michelle.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having us. I have a question. I've just turned 40 this year. Yeah. I'm definitely experiencing some perimenopause symptoms. Yeah. And what was really interesting that I'd never even thought about before was really itchy ears, which was like, I never could have thought that could possibly have been it. But you just mentioned that. Is 40 too young to, I mean.
No.
Okay, I didn't think so. And you know why I didn't think so? So I'm in the Harley menopause group.
Yeah.
And one of the women was talking about vaginal dryness. And that's not something I'm like, it's not really a concern for me at the moment.
Yeah.
But the woman said that, one of the moderators in the group said that is your vagina begging for HRT. And this woman was, you know, she's about 40 as well. So it got me thinking about some of my symptoms and just wondering if it's something I should look into, because it's more in a sense, I guess I'm thinking more of a not preventative because it's not preventing it, but more an easing sort of sense. So there's not such a big surprise when I turn 45 or whatever it may be. What are your thoughts on that, Sam?
I think you get a slow, insidious change in your body. And you sort of sometimes look back and think, oh gosh, yes, that was a bit sore. So if at the moment, and I'm saying this to everybody, if you've got a bit of vaginal dryness and absolutely nothing else, there's a product you can get on Amazon called Yes, Yes, Yes. Now they do something called a vaginal moisturizer. It's got VM written on the packaging. Sometimes I have it here to show you and I haven't. And it's like hand cream for your no-no. And some people literally just put it on just with my hand, aren't I? Put it on every day. And they do that just for day-to-day comfort. They then do a vaginal moisturizer that's oil-based and water-based. And that's particularly used for sex. And they suggest that you mix the oil-based one with the water-based one, and that gives you kind of a slippery feel. Now, I think in the early days of this menopause thing, it's quite a difficult conversation to have with your other half. And so I think I would say it's worth getting. They come from Amazon. You can buy them direct from their products as well, from their suppliers, but it's all sort of, you can't see anything in the packaging, and just experiment with how you're potentially going to bring that into your life. Now, at 40, I think most people will starting to be noticing some symptoms, but if that's all you've got, Michelle, I would just keep a close eye on it. So often people come to us at sort of 45, 50, 55, and they talk about vaginal dryness, and very definitely they've got other things. And so very definitely we would signpost them to a GP to have that conversation. But if that's all you've got at Michelle, and I can see by your icon there that clearly you're interested in nutrition and movement and the mindfulness, you're probably keeping an eye on the other areas of your life, and you just want to keep an eye on it.
Actually, Sam, that's not my biggest concern. I'd say that my biggest concern is actually my joints.
Is it?
Yeah, it's my joints for sure. And I never really thought about it being linked to perimenopause.
Yeah. Okay.
And I know I'd had a DNA test, I don't know, a couple of months ago, and I definitely am more prone to sort of like tendonitis and that sort of thing as well. And I am actually, I'm actually a fitness coach myself. So overactive in that sort of sense, because I, constantly training women. But I think that's more the issue is in that
case, I would go and talk to a doctor.
Yeah. But vaginal dryness, not the biggest concern. It's more the joints for me.
Yeah.
And so that's why I just was wondering if it's something that if I started to kind of look into it now, I don't want it to get any worse per se.
Yeah. Okay, great question. Then just to bring this in, because I guess it's part of the same question, I was also wondering how much can be done in advance of the perimenopause or in the early stage to lessen symptoms, all the possible ones later down the road. How much difference do you think it makes? Huge difference, I think it makes, Alison. If we can embark on a strength-based regime, anywhere from 35, your bones start, this is going to be very dramatic, your bones start to crumble, not literally, but to start to decline in their density from around the age of 32 to 35. So the sooner we can put that strength-based exercise, both in our upper body and in your lower body. So Alison, you asked that question. I know that you're a walker or a runner, so you're getting the bone density in the lower part of your body, but your upper body. Certainly paying attention to your sleep, to your alcohol. All of these lifestyle stages I've mentioned are hugely, hugely important. And you don't need to make massive changes all at once. You can just slowly start paying attention to your gut and your rest. Because if we learn how to take a 10-minute holiday every day, we don't need to then have a crash and have 2 weeks off because we're so exhausted. And again, nobody tells us to put ourselves at the top of the pile. And that's what I'm suggesting. Alison, I hope that helps. And I know you're typing on the balcony, so you may not be able to say yes, but you can type yes. Anybody else got, thanks, Alison. Anybody else got any other questions? Jane, Lorraine, I've got there, Annabelle, Louisa, Melina, any other questions? Okay, so what I will do once again is apologize for the difficulty that you had getting in tonight. We were trialing a new way of getting in, which is to use Team Up, which is what my fitness classes are on. I have actually now managed to stop you getting so many emails, but when I do this again, I'm just going to send out the Zoom link because I think it's easier. I'll be popping you an email shortly to ask you if you would just give me, it takes about 60 seconds, I've timed it. Quite like to know how you found out about this, what your biggest takeaway was, and something, anything else you want to tell me. And then I will send you out the recordings tomorrow and the links, thanks Sarah, and the links to the 7-day video series for you to have a look at. And if you want to talk to me about anything more, you can get in touch with me. I'll send all my links. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it and you don't feel it's full of doom and gloom. I'm 58, sexy and loving it, and I'm sure you will be too. Thank you. Bye.